Korea noticed. Asia reacted. But most people still don't understand what just happened. SB19's 1Z trade launch 2026 wasn't just a comeback. It wasn't just a business move. It was a quiet disruption, one that challenged how Asian pop power has worked for decades. No noise, no controversy, just strategy. And if you miss the signals, you miss the shift. Because this isn't about a group rising, it's about a region recalibrating. Like, share, subscribe. Let's break this down. It didn't trend for days. It didn't break the internet. There were no explosive headlines screaming disruption. And that's exactly why it mattered. When SB19 launched 1Z Trade in 2026, the noise wasn't on social media. It was in monitoring rooms. Korean media outlets began tracking movements. Industry analysts quietly referenced the structure. Executives didn't post reactions. They observed. Because in Asia's pop ecosystem, real shifts don't arrive with hashtags. They arrive with spreadsheets. This wasn't a fan celebration moment. It was a boardroom recalibration. The difference between viral hype and strategic recognition is simple. Hype makes audiences react. Strategy makes competitors study. And they were studying. There were no public challenges, no defensive press releases, no dismissive commentary. Just silence. And in competitive industries, silence is rarely indifference, it's assessment. SB19 didn't launch 1Z Trade as a comeback accessory. They framed it as infrastructure, a structural layer beneath the music. Infrastructure doesn't seek applause, it builds leverage. That's why this felt seismic. Because Asia didn't see a group promoting, it saw artists constructing. And when artists start building systems instead of depending on them, the shockwave travels quietly. But it travels far. Most people looked at 1Z Trade and assumed it was branding. Merch expansion, business diversification, a typical next step. That assumption was the first miscalculation. 1Z Trade isn't a product extension. It's a power mechanism. At its core, it represents controlled ownership, not just of music, but of flow. In traditional Asian pop systems, distribution, licensing, touring rights, merchandising pipelines, and global negotiations are filtered through layered agencies. The artist performs. The system profits first. 1Z Trade subtly reroutes that architecture. Trade branding signals economic intent. It positions SB19 not only as content creators, but as transactional anchors. They're not waiting for gatekeepers to distribute opportunity. They're structuring the gateway themselves. And that changes leverage. Artist-controlled distribution means negotiation shifts. Partnerships become collaborations instead of permissions. Revenue pathways become direct instead of diluted. Creative timelines become self-determined instead of scheduled by hierarchy. This isn't rebellion against the K-pop model. It's disruption through parallel structure. Think of it like chess. Most players focus on capturing pieces. Masters control the board. While audiences were watching performances, SB19 was adjusting the board itself. And once you understand that, 1Z Trade stops looking like expansion. It starts looking like positioning. Why Korea paying attention is the real headline. In Asian pop, public reaction is rarely the real story. Monitoring is. Korea doesn't rush to validate, it calculates. As the region's dominant pop export engine for over a decade, Korea understands infrastructure better than anyone. It built the training systems. It perfected the idol pipeline. It engineered global scalability. So when Korea pays attention quietly, it means something structural has shifted. SB19's 1Z Trade launch wasn't loud enough to demand a public response, but it was strategic enough to demand observation. And that distinction matters, because Filipino self-managed success alters a long-standing narrative. For years, the hierarchy felt clear. Systems flow outward from Seoul. Influence travels one direction. Validation moves downward. But 1Z Trade suggested something different. Not imitation, not dependency, construction. Now the equation changes. Is this a competitive threat or a collaborative opportunity? For the first time, that question isn't theoretical. The difference between influence and permission becomes visible here. Influence commands attention without asking. Permission waits to be granted. SB19 didn't ask to enter the regional structure. They built adjacent to it. And in that moment, Asia began to realize something subtle but powerful. The hierarchy of pop in this region is not permanent. It's negotiable. For decades, Asian pop has operated on a familiar model. Talent is developed, refined, and exported. But control remains centralized. Training systems shape artists. Agencies structure branding. Distribution networks determine reach. Artists become global, but ownership rarely follows the same trajectory. SB19's 1Z trade reframes that architecture. Instead of exporting talent into existing power structures, they began constructing their own. This is a pipeline reversal. Historically, Southeast Asian artists entered larger systems to gain scale. SB19 is scaling without surrendering structure. That distinction changes economics. When artists shift from participants to architects, investment logic shifts too. Capital doesn't just fund performance, it funds infrastructure. Partnerships become equity-based instead of service-based. Regional stakeholders begin to reconsider where leverage truly sits. And this is bigger than one group. If Filipino artists, and by extension other Southeast Asian creatives, can demonstrate sustainable ownership models, then Asia's entertainment capital flows diversify. Risk calculations change. Gatekeeping softens. Over time, this leads to multi-centered power instead of a single export hub. 1Z trade isn't just a business layer. It's a signal that control can be localized and still compete regionally. That's not a comeback narrative. That's structural evolution. And structures, once adjusted, rarely revert. Why Asia reacted differently than the West? When 1Z trade launched, Western commentary asked one question: is it trending? Asian markets asked a different one: is it sustainable? That contrast explains everything. In the West, virality defines relevance. Chart spikes, algorithm bursts, headline cycles, attention is the currency. But across Asia, particularly within established entertainment economies, longevity is the true metric of power. Infrastructure, not impressions, determines legacy. So while Western observers measured buzz, Asian industry professionals examined structure. They looked at ownership layers, distribution channels, scalability, governance. Because in this region, entertainment is not just cultural, it's industrial. Southeast Asia felt this shift most intensely. For decades, the region supplied talent into larger systems. Now, it was witnessing a neighboring country construct a scalable framework without outsourcing authority. That psychological shift matters. A non-Korean group leading strategically challenges an unspoken assumption that system leadership must originate from a single epicenter. It doesn't attack that center. It simply proves alternatives are viable, and viability changes mindset. Asia didn't react loudly because it didn't need to. It recognized the signal beneath the noise. This wasn't a moment chasing validation. It was a structure demanding recognition. Why 2026 was the perfect strategic window. Strategic moves only look obvious after they succeed. By 2026, Asian pop was entering recalibration. The post-globalization surge of the late 2010s had matured. Markets were no longer expanding explosively. They were stabilizing. Saturation within the K-pop system was visible. More debuts, tighter competition, thinner margins of differentiation. At the same time, something quieter was rising. Independent Asian creatives building audiences digitally, bypassing traditional pipelines. Distribution had matured. Streaming platforms equalized borders. Social media fragmented centralized dominance. Fan bases were no longer confined to national clusters. They were decentralized and mobile. The climate was shifting from expansion to optimization. This is where timing becomes strategy. Launching 1Z trade in 2026 wasn't random. It aligned with a moment when audiences were comfortable supporting independent structures, when digital logistics could sustain cross-border operations, and when the idea of multi-centered Asian pop no longer felt radical, just overdue. SB19 read the environment correctly. Not too early, when infrastructure would struggle. Not too late, when the window would narrow. They didn't chase a trend. They moved with the tide, just before it became obvious to everyone else. That's not luck. That's climate awareness. One of the most radical things about SB19's rise isn't the structure, it's the restraint. They didn't dilute their language to chase comfort. They didn't soften their cultural markers to ease entry. They didn't repackage identity for approval. In Asian pop history, expansion often came with adaptation, sometimes subtle, sometimes significant. But 1Z Trade launched without identity negotiation. Filipino language remained present. Cultural cues remained intact. The branding did not pivot toward imitation. It matured toward clarity. And that distinction changes perception. Across Asia, rooted artists are respected differently. When an act expands without erasing origin, it signals confidence. It tells the market, we are not entering to blend in. We are entering to contribute. This is the shift from imitation to innovation. For years, Southeast Asian pop was measured against dominant systems. Now it's being evaluated on its own terms. That psychological repositioning matters more than any chart. They didn't ask to be included. They built something worth noticing. That line captures the essence. Because inclusion implies hierarchy, construction implies parity. And when identity remains intact during expansion, it transforms growth into influence, not assimilation. That's the deeper win. Why this changes the blueprint for P-pop. Every industry has a ceiling, until someone proves it's imaginary. For P-pop, that ceiling was psychological as much as structural. Global recognition felt possible, but system ownership felt distant. Large-scale infrastructure was assumed to require external validation or foreign backing. 1Z Trade disrupts that assumption. When a Filipino group demonstrates operational control at a regional level, investment confidence shifts. Stakeholders begin to see scalability within the country itself. Capital flows differently when precedent exists. This is how blueprints change. Independent Filipino labels now have a model to reference. Negotiations with international partners become more balanced because proof of concept exists. Collaboration shifts from dependency to mutual interest. But the deepest impact is generational. Younger Filipino artists watching this unfold are no longer asking, how do we enter someone else's system? They're asking, how do we build ours smarter? That mindset alters the future. Because once a psychological ceiling breaks, it doesn't reform easily. Ambition expands, standards elevate, infrastructure planning becomes part of artistic conversation. SB19 didn't just expand their own leverage, they expanded what feels realistic for the entire ecosystem. And that's how movements begin. Not with noise, but with new expectations. The most strategic part of 1Z Trade wasn't what SB19 said, it was what they didn't. No public confrontation, no competitive call-outs, no narrative framing themselves against anyone. That restraint is deliberate. In high-level industries, power rarely announces itself through volume. It reveals itself through structure. SB19 didn't attempt to disrupt loudly. They didn't position themselves as challengers to an existing system. They simply built something parallel and functional. That's influence without aggression. Strategic humility is often misunderstood as passivity. In reality, it's confidence. When you know your framework is strong, you don't need spectacle. You allow performance metrics, operational stability, and sustained execution to speak. And over time, results compound. This approach builds long-term credibility because it avoids volatility. There are no dramatic peaks followed by silence. There is only steady expansion. Partners trust that. Investors prefer that. Audiences grow with that. Noise builds moments. Structure builds eras. That line defines this move. Moments trend. Eras endure. By choosing architecture over attention, SB19 positioned themselves not as a temporary surge, but as a durable presence. And durability is the rarest currency in pop. For years, Asian pop operated with a visible center of gravity. Influence radiated outward from a primary hub. Trends traveled in one dominant direction. The hierarchy felt stable, almost permanent. But permanence in culture is an illusion. What 1Z trade signals is not the collapse of a center, but the emergence of multiple ones. Asia is moving toward multi-centered creative power, different countries building scalable systems, distinct identities expanding without dilution, collaboration based on strength rather than dependence. This is decentralization. And decentralization changes negotiation dynamics. It reshapes touring circuits. It diversifies investment patterns. It widens the definition of what Asian pop leadership looks like. SB19 is not an anomaly in this shift. They are a catalyst, early evidence of a broader recalibration already underway. Their strategic timing simply made the transition visible. Years from now, analysts may point back to 2026 not as a dramatic revolution, but as a quiet inflection point, when the region subtly rebalanced itself. Because this wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it wasn't confrontational, it was structural. And structures redefine systems over time. This wasn't a launch, it was a signal.